I want to start with an egg, not a metaphor, an actual egg, sitting on a kitchen counter. You reach for something above it. Your elbow catches the edge. The egg rolls, falls, hits the floor and breaks, yolk spreading, shell shattering. The whole structure that took a chicken several days to produce destroyed in a fraction of a second. Now, here is the question I actually want to ask. Not why doesn't it reassemble? I've thought about irreversibility before, and that's a different story. The question I want to ask is this: what was the egg, not what it looked like, what it was structurally, physically? Because the egg, before it hit the floor, was something genuinely extraordinary, something that physics has only recently started to understand properly. And when you understand what the egg actually was, something very strange happens, music, to the God argument. The egg was a structure that arose spontaneously, without a designer, without anyone specifying its shape, its proteins, its membrane, music, its internal organization. It was produced by biological processes that are themselves the product of 4 billion years of physics running forward without supervision. The egg is physics organizing music itself. And the question of whether God is necessary to explain that, whether the spontaneous self-organization of matter into complex structures requires a divine organizer, turns out to have an answer. Specific, mathematical, surprisingly clean answer. The answer is no, not probably not, oh we don't think so. No, and I want to show you why using 4 arguments that come from some of the deepest and most surprising physics of the last 100 years. Starting with the moment the egg first became possible. Before I get into the arguments, let me tell you what I'm actually claiming music, because I want to be precise, and I don't want to oversell it. I'm not claiming that the broken egg disproves God in some ultimate philosophical sense. Philosophy is not my department. What I'm claiming is more specific. I'm claiming music, that the specific features of the physical world that are usually cited as evidence requiring a God, the existence of ordered structures, the fine-tuning of physical law, appearance of design in complex systems, music, the directionality of time. Each of those features has a natural physical explanation that is not just we don't know. It's an actual mechanism, one that produces the feature without needing a designer. And when you add those 4 mechanisms up, when you see them all pointing in the same direction, God organized this doesn't become impossible. It becomes redundant. A variable that was never doing the work it was supposed to do. The egg music shows you all 4 of them. Let's go. To understand the egg, you have to go back further than chickens, much further. You have to go back to a fraction of a second after the Big Bang, when something happened that determined everything that came after. The early universe was symmetric, extraordinarily, almost perfectly symmetric. The laws of physics in those first moments were the same in every direction. Matter and antimatter existed in nearly equal amounts. The forces of nature, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity, were unified into a single force with a single symmetry. And then the universe cooled. And as it cooled, something happened called spontaneous symmetry breaking. You've seen this before without knowing the name. Take water and cool it until it freezes. Liquid water is symmetric. Every direction is the same. The ice crystal is not. It has a specific lattice structure, a specific preferred directions. The symmetry of the liquid spontaneously broke into the lower symmetry of the solid when the temperature dropped below a threshold. The same thing happened to the universe. As it cooled through critical temperatures, music, the unified symmetric force, spontaneously broke into the separate forces we observe today. Electromagnetism separated from the weak force. The Higgs field acquired a value that gave particles their masses. Matter survived in slightly greater abundance than antimatter, 1 part per billion, because of a tiny asymmetry in symmetry breaking. Nobody chose this. Nobody specified which direction the symmetry would break. The specific laws of physics we observe, the specific values of the forces that make chemistry possible, that make stars burn, that make eggs exist, are the result of spontaneous symmetry breaking in the early universe. Now, here's why this destroys a specific theological argument. The most common sophisticated argument for God is the fine-tuning argument. The laws of physics appear calibrated for complexity and life. Someone must have set the calibration. But spontaneous symmetry breaking shows that the calibration is not an input, it's an output. The laws of physics are not settings that a creator chose from a menu of options. They are the result of a physical process, cooling, phase transitions, symmetry breaking, that was music going to produce some specific laws regardless of whether anyone was there to choose them. The egg did not require a recipe. The recipe music wrote itself in the first fractions of a second of the universe's existence through spontaneous symmetry breaking. Just as no one chose the specific structure of a snowflake, it emerges necessarily from the physics of water crystallizing at a given temperature. No one chose the specific structure of the laws of physics. They emerge from the dynamics of a cooling universe. The appearance of design is real. The designer music is not. The design is a phase transition. This one is my favorite because it sounds completely insane. And it's completely music, right? In the late 19th century, the physicist Ludwig Boltzmann was working on statistical music mechanics, the theory of how the macroscopic behavior of matter emerges from the microscopic behavior of atoms, and he confronted a problem. The second law of thermodynamics says entropy increases. The universe was in a low entropy state in the past and moves toward higher entropy. But why was it in a low entropy state in the past? What is the explanation for the special initial conditions? Boltzmann's answer, which he eventually abandoned because it led somewhere deeply uncomfortable, was that the low entropy initial music state was a statistical fluctuation. If the universe is infinitely old and in thermal equilibrium on average, music, then sufficiently rare fluctuations will occasionally produce patches of low entropy. We find ourselves in such a patch because only in such patches can observers exist. And here is where it gets genuinely strange. If statistical fluctuations can produce low entropy patches, the question is, what is the smallest fluctuation that could produce an observer? The smallest fluctuation sufficient to produce a conscious observer is not a whole universe, it's a brain. Just a brain, arising spontaneously from the random, thermal fluctuation of particles with memories already installed by the fluctuation itself, false memories of a life that never happened, music in a universe that doesn't really exist as remembered. This is the Boltzmann brain. And it's not a joke, it's a serious problem in cosmology. Here's why it matters for God. The fine-tuning argument says that the probability of a universe compatible with life arising by chance is so small that that requires a designer. But if a designer can arrange things to produce observers, the smallest arrangement sufficient for an observer is a Boltzmann music brain, vastly smaller and vastly more probable than an entire fine-tuned music universe. If God can do anything, if God can arrange matter to produce conscious observers, then God should produce the minimal arrangement, not the maximum one. The existence of the whole universe, 2 trillion galaxies, 8 billion years, the entire apparatus of physical law, is an enormously inefficient way to produce observers if producing observers was the goal. A design optimizing for observers would not build a universe. A design optimizing for observers would produce music Boltzmann brains directly. The fact that we seem to exist in a whole universe rather than as Boltzmann brains is a problem for the God as designer hypothesis, because a maximally efficient designer would not do it this way. And if God is not maximally efficient, then God is either not omnipotent or doesn't actually care about observers, which undermines the entire purpose of the fine-tuning argument, which was that God designed the universe for life. The egg exists in a whole universe. A designer optimizing for eggs could have produced a single egg in a Boltzmann fluctuation without building all of space, time around it. The universe is too big for the eggs, and that bigness is a problem for the designer hypothesis, not evidence for it. The symmetry-breaking argument shows that physical law writes itself without a setter. The Boltzmann brain argument shows that if there is a designer, he's wildly inefficient. The next two arguments go somewhere I find even more surprising, one about whether the egg was statistically inevitable, and one about whether the past is as fixed as we think. Subscribe. Music back in 30 seconds. In 1890, the mathematician Henri Poincaré proved something remarkable about physical systems. For any bounded music dynamical system, any system confined to finite region of space with finite energy, the system will eventually return to a state arbitrarily close to any prior state. Given enough time, the system revisits every configuration it has ever been in over and over again. This is the Poincaré recurrence theorem, and it applies to any system governed by Hamiltonian mechanics, which is essentially all of classical physics, and with some caveats, quantum mechanics. Now apply this to the egg. The egg and the floor constitute a physical system. The egg breaks. Entropy increases. The system moves to a high entropy configuration. Shell fragments, yolk spread, disorder. By Poincaré's theorem, if you wait long enough, the system will return to a state arbitrarily close to the intact egg. Not by divine intervention, not by magic, by the purely mechanical dynamics of the system exploring its available phase space. How long would you have to wait? Music, the Poincaré recurrence time for a macroscopic system, for something as complex as a broken egg, is so enormous that writing it out would require more digits, music, than there are atoms in the observable universe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 56 years, give or take. That is not a time we can experience. It is not a time that is physically meaningful in any sense that connects to our experience. But here's the point. The broken egg reassembles naturally, mechanically, without God, given sufficient time and the uninterrupted operation of physical law. The God who reassembles eggs is doing something that the physics of the system will do anyway, eventually, without him. His intervention is not a violation of the natural order. It's an anticipation of it. It's a statistical shortcut through a process music that was going to happen by itself. Now, you might say, yes, but it would take an incomprehensible amount of time. The practical difference between God reassembling the egg now and the egg reassembling by Poincaré recurrence in 10 to the 10 to the 56 years is so vast as to be effectively infinite. And that's true. Practically, the recurrence time is meaningless. But that's not the argument. The argument is about whether God is doing something the physics prohibits. He isn't. The physics permits spontaneous egg reassembly. The physics will eventually accomplish it without divine assistance. God's role in the reassembly is not music to do the impossible. It's to do the overwhelmingly improbable quickly. And doing the improbable quickly is not the kind of thing that the God hypothesis helps explain. It's the kind of thing that requires the God hypothesis to specify exactly how, by what mechanism, through what process, violating which conservation laws, the improbable is made probable. No such mechanism has been specified. In the absence of a mechanism, God did it quickly is not an explanation. It's impatience dressed up as theology. John Wheeler was one of the most creative physicists of the 20th century. He coined the terms black hole music and wormhole and quantum foam. He was Richard Feynman's doctoral advisor at Princeton. And late in his career, he developed an idea that I find simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling. Wheeler called it the participatory universe. The idea starts from the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, the fact that quantum systems exist in superposition until observed, at which point they collapse into definite states. Music, Wheeler took this seriously at a cosmological scale. He proposed that observation, conscious participation, is not just a feature of quantum measurement in laboratories. It is a feature of the universe's existence at every scale. Music, that the universe, in some sense, brought itself into being through the act of being observed by conscious observers within it. He called it a self-excited circuit. Music, the universe, gives rise to observers, and observers give rise to the universe in a loop with no clear starting point. And he designed an experiment to test this, the delayed choice experiment. Here's the setup. You fire a photon at a half, silvered mirror. The photon splits. Part of its wave function goes left, part goes right. The two paths recombine at a detector. In the standard setup, if you put detectors on both paths before the recombination, music, the photon behaves like a particle. It takes one path or the other. If you let the paths recombine and look at the interference pattern, the photon behaves music like a wave. It took both paths simultaneously. Wheeler's twist: what if you wait until after the photon has already passed the half, silvered mirror, until it's already apparently committed to one path or the other, and then decide whether to detect which path information or look for interference? The answer, confirmed experimentally, is that the photon's behavior at the mirror, whether it acted as a particle or a wave, is determined by the measurement choice made after it has already passed the mirror. The future measurement choice determines the past behavior of the photon. Let me say that again. The choice you make now, the measurement you decide to perform, retroactively determines what the photon did in the past. This is not science fiction. This is experimental physics. Music, the delayed choice experiment, has been performed with increasing precision, and the result is always the same. Now, apply this to the egg. The egg broke. The event is in the past. It seems fixed, determined, over. But Wheeler's physics asks, is the past as fixed as we think? For macroscopic objects, for eggs, decoherence happens so rapidly and involves so many particles that the quantum indeterminacy of any particular past event, music, is, in practice, completely inaccessible. The egg's past is, for any practical purpose, fixed. But here's what Wheeler's participatory universe says about God. If observation participates in determining physical reality, if the universe is in some sense, brought into existence through the act of being observed, then the universe does not need a creator who existed before it and set it up from outside. The universe creates itself through the participation of the observers it produces. God is not necessary as an external creator. The universe is its own creator through a temporal loop of observation and existence. Wheeler himself put it this way: no phenomenon is a real phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. The universe, observed by the beings that evolved to produce retroactively, participates in its music, own creation. This is not a proof that God doesn't exist. It is something more specific. A physical framework in which a God who exists outside the universe and created it from outside is not just unconfirmed, but structurally unnecessary. The universe creates itself. The egg exists because the universe that produced it participated in its own creation through the observers who would eventually ask why it broke. I want to stop here and be honest about something, because I think the 4 arguments I've made are genuinely powerful. I also think they don't add up to what the title of this video suggests they add up to. Spontaneous symmetry breaking explains how the laws of physics arose without a setter. Good, solid physics. The Boltzmann brain argument shows that a God optimizing for observers would not build a universe. Good, solid logic. Poincare recurrence shows that God is not doing something physically impossible when he fixes broken eggs, just something extremely improbable. Good, useful precision. Wheeler's participatory universe shows that the universe may be its own creator through a retrocausal music loop. Interesting, genuinely interesting, also genuinely speculative. But here is what none of these arguments touch. Why does the universe exist at all? Not why does it have these laws. Symmetry breaking addresses that. Not why is it hospitable to complexity. Boltzmann and Poincare address that. Why is there anything rather than nothing? I don't know. Nobody knows. The question might not even be a well-formed question. Why implies purpose, and purpose implies a mind, and we might be making a category error by applying it to the existence of the universe itself. But I'm not going to pretend the question doesn't nag at me, clears throat, because it does. The egg breaks. I can explain the breaking. I can explain the laws that govern the breaking. I can explain why those laws exist rather than other laws. I can show you that God is not necessary for any specific step in the process. What I cannot music do, what no physicist can do, is explain why there is music, a process at all, why there's physics rather than nothing. And sitting with that, genuinely sitting with it, not reaching for an answer, is uncomfortable. Music, I've been uncomfortable with it for most of my life. I'm still uncomfortable with it. I think that's the right response. Let me tell you what I think the egg actually is, not religiously, physically. The egg on the counter, before it fell, was a temporary local reduction in entropy maintained by the biological machinery of a hen, which is itself a temporary local reduction in entropy maintained by consuming other structures of low entropy, which are themselves maintained by the flow of energy from the sun, which is maintained by nuclear fusion converting hydrogen to helium, which is possible because of the specific values of the strong nuclear force, which arose from spontaneous symmetry breaking in the first moments of the universe. The egg is the universe doing what the universe does when physics runs forward for long enough, producing structure, producing complexity, producing eventually a being complex enough to hold the egg and wonder why it exists. That chain from the Big Bang to symmetry, breaking to stars, to planets, to chemistry, to life, to eggs, to the person holding the egg, is not a chain that required anyone to construct it. It required physics, it required time, it required the overwhelmingly large number of configurations that the universe explored in 8 billion years. The egg is not a miracle. The egg is what happens when you give physics enough room and enough time. And the person holding the egg, the person asking why the egg exists, what it means, whether someone made it, that person is also what happens when you give physics enough room and enough time. We are the universe holding itself, that's right, asking about itself, finding itself improbable and yet here. The question of did God make the egg is in the end the universe asking whether it made itself. The music and the physics says yes, not through intention, not through design, through symmetry breaking and music, statistical mechanics and quantum participation, and the sheer overwhelming productivity of physical law given sufficient time. The egg made itself in the only sense that making means anything in a universe without a prior maker. And it is more extraordinary for it. The egg was always going to break, not in the sense of fate, not in the sense of divine plan, in the sense of physics. Given the specific music quantum state of the universe at the moment your elbow approached the counter, given the exact positions and momentum of every particle involved to the precision that quantum mechanics permits, the probability that the egg would fall and break was overwhelmingly close to 1. Not certain. Quantum mechanics doesn't give you certainty, but close enough that always going to break is the right way to describe it. The egg breaking was not an accident. It was the universe doing what physics said it would do given those initial conditions, music in that moment. And the initial conditions came from prior conditions, and those came from prior conditions, all the way back to the Big Bang, all the way back to whatever produced the Big Bang, which we don't know, which might be a previous cycle, which might be a quantum fluctuation from nothing, which might be something we haven't thought of yet. But at no point in that chain, no step in the causal sequence from the Big Bang to the egg to the floor, does anything happen that requires more than physics. No designer, no setter of initial conditions, no entity that chose which direction the symmetry would break, just physics running forward producing the egg, breaking the egg, and producing the person who asks why. I find that, and I mean this genuinely, not as a consolation, I find that more satisfying than the alternative. Not because it's comfortable, it isn't, because it's honest. The egg was always going to break. The question was always going to be asked. And the answer was always going to be not God, just physics, which is, and I want you to hear this the way I mean it, the most extraordinary thing there is.